you are so close to the manifestation of that thing that you feel a desire for it. So it's practically reversed for a human. A human's like, no, of course. Like, I felt the thing, I decided fish tacos, and now I got to go look online to see where the best fish taco place, and then I will do, right? So we think we have the idea, and then we got to get to the desire. And they're like, no. You have been expanding in this direction of this energy and expanding. And now it's so clear to you that you can name it.
Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Beitz. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons. My guest today, Katie Weiss, spent more than 15 years as a data technology strategist, working across teams with sales professionals, data scientists, physicists, and engineers to find new opportunities in nascent technologies. Her work spans startups, well-known technology companies such as Twitter and Ball Aerospace, and global brands such as PepsiCo, Unilever, and Samsung. Then Katie's world changed forever as she became the channel and interpreter for a group of loving, expansive, and non-physical entities she affectionately calls the chorus. Together they create books and podcasts, of which I've listened to lots, that provide new explanations of the human experience, including perspectives on our beliefs, emotions, everyday challenges, and the awakening process humanity is currently experiencing. As a result of encountering the chorus, listeners and readers, very much including myself, have consistently described a sense of opening, clarity, and ease. Different pieces of their lives, as well as other teachings or lessons, seem to fit more closely together. Katie describes that connective effect, which she often experiences with the chorus, with a single word: love. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. The first time I heard you talking on a podcast, I was just fascinated and went off, found your podcast, your book. And you've got 2 seasons of the podcast. I think I'm just about finished the first season. And then I downloaded your first book, finished that, downloaded your second book, and started listening to that. And it got a bit like, whoa, this is a bit full on. And then I accidentally started listening to your first book again and didn't realize for a while because I missed so much. It was just groundbreaking and so made life so much sense for me. So tell us how did all this come about? Like what's the background to all this?
It's still a mystery to me too. So I can tell you the sequence of events. Often we can tell each other the sequence of events, and then I don't know, the meaning is still coming through each day. But I was very much just, I don't know, a regular person. I went to school, I had jobs, heard about meditation. Maybe I tried a yoga class, but it didn't feel it was my destiny by any chance. And then right around the time, it coincided pretty much with the birth of my son, I started to get sick. Mysterious symptoms seemed to grow by the month. And as I continued to grow more and more sick, of course, as we all have happen, when answers start running thin on the ground and you've tried everything you can think of, you open to other things that you might not have normally tried. And one of the things I opened to was channeling. And that's when the chorus appeared.
Wow. So, and I totally understand and get channeling. Some of the listeners I know are on that wavelength, and some are probably like, what is she actually talking about here? And on our previous conversation a week ago, like when I was talking to you, I feel at certain times in my life I've channeled in minor ways, nothing like to the extent that you have. So, just if you can explain how that happens, what's the process? How does this information come through that makes people's lives make sense? Like, how does that happen?
Sure, absolutely. And, it's a great question. I mean, as you said in my intro previous to this, I was very much in scientific roles. And so maybe I had heard about channeling, but I also there was a part of me that thought those people were maybe just a little bit nuts. It was their way of interpreting their own psyche, as was maybe an opinion I held. And, even now that I do it, who knows? It may still be true. But I think channeling for people who listen to these types of messages, or for me who do it because the answers that come through are typically more expansive or more profound in a way that the conscious mind maybe couldn't conjure up on its own. So, channeling is as old as the oracle at Delphi. It's actually been around for a very long time, and different cultures have had these experiences in different ways. And, from the Course's own description of how they view our human experience, one way of looking at it is that channeling is accessing information that are beyond our belief system. So if we have a conscious reality that's driven by the things that we believe, and we open up somehow energetically to a pure energetic channel that's not thought about, judged, evaluated, where we don't activate the mind at all, and information comes through on that channel, then that is in effect the process of channeling. It's bringing through information that kind of somehow hits a loophole in the belief systems and isn't as evaluated, isn't as judged, or basically molded into a version of concepts that we have already tossed around and all embraced. So channels do this in many different ways. Some get into a meditative state. Some go into a hypnotic state where they actually are not very consciously present and another entity comes in. I am what you would call a conscious channel. So I am totally here. I hear what the chorus is saying as I'm saying it to somebody else. And in fact, sometimes I'm having a simultaneous conversation with them in the background because I've learned to sort of just let the information come out. And it's amazing how easily your body can just ride that wave and say those words without needing to think about it. It's kind of like those moments that athletes have where they just sort of get in a zone and they don't even think about it. They just, pull the bow back and the arrow hits the target. Those moments of flow happen when you open up to these energetic frequencies. And so the information that comes through, I am conscious of as it's coming through, but I'm not actually thinking about something and then saying it. I'm saying it and then thinking about it as I
Wow.
am letting their information in.
Wow. So, like, I'm just imagining here how challenging that would be, but you're saying how simple it is. Like I'm imagining I'm having a conversation with you or someone else, and if it were to happen to me, it would be like a second, like someone turned the radio on beside me, and I've got a message coming through the radio, plus I'm talking to you, and now I've got to decipher the two. But you're saying it's not like a second voice coming in to confuse you. It's like a warm glow from a heater or something, and you interpret that information a different way than you are from sounds from another person's voice. It's just amazing. Was it challenging in the beginning? Has it got easier, or was it just always like that?
No, absolutely, it has been challenging. I mean, it seems a bit of a paradox, but the hardest part about this is how easy it was. So that means to say, as I opened to the information and it came through, there's all these beliefs in us that we've utilized from the course's standpoint for the experience of limitation, right? So when you connect directly to energy, there's a lot inside of us that shows up that rebuffs that kind of pure connection. Things like beliefs in loss of control, things like beliefs in lack of trust, things like beliefs in what the hell is this and how do I know it's safe? And so as these things come up, it actually creates like a true physical and energetic friction, and the body gets tired. So, so the athletic metaphor for channeling is actually really appropriate because it is like building a muscle. It is like building endurance where you can go further and further and further with this energy because I channeled for about 7 years, 6 or 7 years before I did anything publicly with it. And it took that 6 years of pretty much daily, every few days practice of bringing through a channeled message. And in the beginning, all I could handle was the sensation of them before my whole body freaked out. And as they talk about in the first book, I got sick. I often got sick in the early, experiences of channeling. Now, my body was already sick. So, who's to say if I was just awakening broad scale? And so, illness was a representation of that. And so, conversations with the chorus were just sort of like a cherry on top of an experience that was already happening. But overall, it still required time and acclimation and practice to figure out how best I could do it. What did I need? How did I evaluate it afterwards to feel more safe? Then I could trust it for a longer period of time next time.
Mm.
I tried channeling in a variety of emotional states, actually. The advice to me had been get in a clear, happy, loving place so that, you can ideally attract something, entities that are happy and loving also. And I thought that advice was pretty sound, but also I was kind of going through a personal health at that juncture in my life. So the number of times that I was in a clear, happy, space was next to none. And the whole point of reaching the chorus was because I had run out of answers for my own illness and I needed to try something different. And I thought, what if there is a perspective out there that understands this? So the best I could do was get into a place where I wanted to understand. And sometimes I was pissed and I wanted to understand. Sometimes I was happy and I wanted didn't really happen that often. Sometimes I was exhausted and I wanted to understand. It was like lay down on the floor at the end of the day and just be like, what is this? And consistently, answers came through that were a different way of looking at it that really embraced the entirety of the human experience. And it made it feel not forgiven, maybe not dismissed, not any of those things, but it made it feel as though there could be other perspectives out there where it made sense and where it was okay. So ultimately, I got into a much more loving place. I was still sick. That's true. I was still sick for years as I connected with the chorus, but I had this sort of like coaching team beside me that gave me a perspective on it that helped me run the really hard race. And that was worth it. That is what brought me back over and over and over again. Each time I had this physical, energetic friction, right? Some people would be like, why the heck do that again? Well, why climb mountains a second time, right? There's an aspect of something in the experience that we get out of it that says that enriched me or that helped me in some way. And so then you go back and try again.
Right. Wow. Yeah, and as you said there, like, laying there on the floor and you're like, I was wondering that, like, were you getting answers? So when you were channeling, the information was coming through, and did it then, like, I know you've written a lot, you've got 2 books now, and you've got 2 seasons of the podcast, which is probably roughly 50 episodes, I'm guessing. So there's a lot of documented channeling that's come through. But in those first 6 or 7 years, were you writing things down, or was it just locking into your system and you understood it and didn't need to write it down? Or how was that?
So in the beginning, it was pure sensation. That lasted for some number of weeks before I wanted to evaluate it. And the best way I knew how was to write it down. So for quite a while, I would say maybe a year and a half or 2 years, I would write down my questions, write down their answers, leave it for maybe a day or two, come back to it and see how I felt about their answers. And over again, the more I came back to the answers they had given me, the more different interpretations I actually got out of it. And I would say that's actually true to this day. Kind of like you were saying, I went back to the first book and now there's this total other layer. And that's when I started to understand more about the chorus and that there actually is a chorus of voices. So they are representative of a variety of different perspectives or energies, as some people would say. And those perspectives are woven into the way that they answer things. And so often I still go back to material that I wrote in the early years, or I re listen to one of our podcasts and I get another interpretation out of the material.
Oh,
After I was writing for some time, that's when I started to speak them out loud. And it became much more fluid, much more real time, actually. So rather than writing down my questions all day, and then going home at night or, maybe twice a week, I could, sit down and channel. Instead, I would start asking them in the moment or shortly after the moment. So I'd get back in the car and I'd be like, what was that? Or what's your perspective on why that just happened? And I tried recording a lot of it, did record a lot of it, but ultimately it hit a speed of just kind of all the time. And I just started to trust that if I ever needed to retell it or when it was time to write it into a book, the right information would show up at that time for the book because eventually so much was just coming through all the time.
yeah, you can only record so much and go back and recap so much. And I've found that already. Like for the listeners, tip season 1, episode 6 is about intuition. Now, I've listened to that episode 3 times, and it's like it's each time it's like I haven't heard it before. And listening to the book, oh my God, it's like I'm driving along and then I just glaze. I'm listening intently and then I just glaze over. My system is not ready for the next 10 minutes that are spoken. It's just how I know that. And then all of a sudden I switch on again. It's like you get onto the next paragraph. And now I'm like intently listening again for the next 3 minutes. And I'm like, oh, wow, that makes so much sense. And then I just glaze over again. And I know I'm going through this energetic frequency where I'm touching the edge of what's being spoken and I'm barely perceiving it. It's I was going to say 50 gazillion, but that's just an under exaggeration. It's so far off my frequency spectrum that I'm just on the edge and I'm just catching glimpses of it. And it's like the sun's just hitting the horizon to rise and it just starts to pick and then it goes back down. But that glimmer of the sun is just like lightened my world for the day. It's like, whoa. I'm, if I was to download all that information that's in one of those books in like one day and take it all in and grasp and understand it all, I would explode. Like it's just,
Yeah.
it's, yeah, it's fantastic. Now, for some of the listeners, you're just going to like, if you listen to a book or the podcast, some of you would just go, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's just nuts. Some of you will just go, I can't stop listening to this. This is insane. It's so good. But yeah, and how the chorus explained so I've heard the term probably 10 years ago. I started to hear the term, we need to raise our frequency. So in the terminology I've heard through come from the chorus, I think possibly they're using the word broaden or widen is now, and the reason I've got these headphones on is I have serious hearing issues. Or with them on, I can hear perfectly. But so many, many years ago, I started getting my ears tested and got hearing aids and things. And so when the first audiologist showed me a printout of my hearing test of the highs and the lows, it went along and there's just narrow bands up at the higher frequency levels where it dropped down to almost nothing and then would go back up again, across and down again. So when I started hearing you talking about these frequency bands, I just started picturing that in my mind, these little slithers that drop to nothing, like on the drawing. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's where we are. The humans are. We're at this tiny slither where it's the one little bit we can hear, we can see, hear, sense, whatever on that frequency band. We actually have that bit. All the rest of it, we have nothing. Um, does that sort of how,
Yeah,
you know,
totally. So broadly, the chorus defines frequency as a place of understanding. So when we resonate with a frequency in a particular energy of the universe, we're resonant there, meaning we embody it, we energize it, we understand it. And so I don't know that the chorus would say that humanity has to raise their vibration because frankly they think everything we have done is incredible. They are humanity's biggest fans. And they feel that way because they see us all the way from the choice we made to be here, to experience limitation, all the way to when we move on from it. They see the whole trajectory. And so to them, everything that's created in between, every single experience that we have is a representation of that perfect choice and of that perfect experience that we made out of love. They say, we know it may not feel like this every day, in your human reality, but you did choose to be here, and it was a choice that was made out of love.
Mhm.
So they may not say humanity has to raise the frequency because they don't take an issue with any of the frequencies that any of us are hitting while we're here. But they would say, what an interesting reflection of your awakening that you sense that there's got to be lighter ways of living, lighter ways of experiencing your days, and you want to get there. But you have all these beliefs of powerlessness and loss of control and all of this stuff. And so you don't know how to get there other than to fight against the frequency that you're on. And they say, this is amazing. Like only here, could you ever have this experience of not just naturally and effervescently just whoop going right over to the other frequency that you want to, which, sometimes they would tell me stuff like this and I would laugh. And then other days I would be like, oh, I've had enough of you guys. It's hard to hear sometimes a perspective of total ease and total love for the human experience that I am currently grinding through. So, with the idea of expansion, then that's what they say awakening is. So they may not say you have to raise your frequency, but they say we can understand if you want to, because you perceive you have a preference and a desire. You're ready to graduate. Okay, so that's great. And they say, well, awakening was our choice to expand from a point of limitation, meaning we're not jettisoning off of it. We're not going to hit the eject button and bounce over to another one. We're starting here and going to broaden from it, meaning we're going to hold and understand our perspective of limitation as we move past it, basically. So we will get into broader frequencies of more and different understandings that will add to the human understanding that we developed here. Nothing that we've created thus far would be invalidated. If anything, what happens, and I think a lot of people experience this when they listen to the chorus, is that more aspects of your human experience will make more sense as you expand.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, because like I'm seeing it now, like not only from what I've heard from you in the chorus, but from others as well. Sort of as is in your introduction, where it's all tying together. That we we have no idea before we came to this incarnation on this planet who we were and how magnificent and amazing and I don't even know what words to use, but I'm starting to realize that we're like supreme creators, like from somewhere, and we just all chose to join in this game with the limitation, and we limited. And like I've heard, I was either in a book or on the podcast, our eyes, our physical eyes, are actually our blindfold. They just restrict everything we used to be able to perceive. And we think we can see and they're really good. But, when you think they're a blindfold, it's like, oh, okay, it's a whole different thing. And so that's what I'm seeing now that we're just we've chosen to be here to learn, to experience, and there's no good or bad, right or wrong. It's all a learning experience. And it's just trying to simplify it down so I can even grasp it at all. But it's just looking at that angle. And then you look at other people who I have always deemed as they're bad, they're evil. Someone should, take them out so that the world's a better place. We should hire an assassin to take them out, and then the world will be a better place when they're not here to harm us all. But it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, hang on, they're just there, they're just fulfilling their role with the whole thing to help us learn more, so that we can experience the emotions that we think they've caused in our life, but that we've allowed, that we get to experience now. And the more we experience and handle that emotion, the more we learn, the more we understand. It's just, yeah, I love it. I love it. Going over to my notes here, and what I'm about to quote, again, because I've been listening to your podcast and your books at the same time, because I haven't been reading your books, I'll admit, I've been listening. There's a quote in there and it says, an intuition will tell you what is coming, an inspiration will tell you where to go, a desire will advise you of where you're headed. And until I'd heard this, I'd never really divided those things up into three: an intuition, and inspiration, and desire. So I'm now thinking maybe in the past, what I've thought as intuition may have been inspiration. So I'm just curious, how do inspirations and desires typically come through compared to intuition? Like, do they come through the same way? There a sense, a feeling, and all that sort of thing?
It's a great question. And we can spend the next like 3 hours on it. So I'll try to start with the highlights and then you tell me,
Okay.
how deep we want to go. So, so the chorus says, look, there's no perspective in the entire universe that's invalid. It's just all different ways of looking at things. So this is one way to look at inspiration and intuition and desire. And so we'll start by saying the chorus says that, we've sort of been in this five senses experience of reality. And now we're expanding into what they call our energetic tools. So these are things that sort of precipitate before the five senses experience. In the beginning, our sense of these things is kind of all lumped. It hasn't developed nuance yet. We call it the sixth sense. And they're like, actually, there's a whole lot going on in that one sixth sense. And that's what you're expanding into is an entire suite of, tools to read and perceive all the different information available in energy. So, one of these distinctions that they made early on was the difference between intuitions, inspirations, and desires. And I'll start with desire. Let's start with the one at the end because that one's the closest to our five senses perception.
Okay.
We get a desire. It's like, yes, I want fish tacos for dinner. Right? It's clear. In fact, when we say I have a desire, there's almost part of us that waits for the person to say what the desire is, right? It's almost synonymous with a clear idea of a thing that the person wants to have. So, one thing that the chorus has said over and over to me throughout the years as I've grappled with this is desire is directional, meaning you are so close to the manifestation of that thing that you feel a desire for it. So it's practically reversed for a human. A human's like, no, 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 of course. Like I felt the thing, I decided fish tacos, and now I got to go look online to see where the best fish taco place, and then I will do, right? So we think we have the idea, and then we got to get to the desire. And they're like, no, 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 no. You have been expanding in this direction of this energy and expanding, 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 expanding. And now it's so clear to you that you can name it and you call it fish tacos.
Wow.
So over and over as I've gone through expansion and I have come up against something that I want, I recognize more and more the human response, which is it's not here yet. It's not here yet. You're right. It's not here yet. I got to DoorDash the fish tacos. I got to, right? It's so synonymous with our human experience. And sometimes as you go through awakening, the desires get, I would say, a little bit more unknown, a little less able to just name. It feels so much bigger than anything that could be expressed. You don't even know what to call it. It burns inside of you sometimes. There's this thing that is missing and you want and you don't know what it is. And they say, great, you are now feeling the desire and the information that's in the desire earlier and earlier in the process before it's been molded down into something that you already know in your five senses world that you guys have already experienced a jillion times. How
Yeah,
many times have you had fish
something
tacos?
familiar that we're used, like fish
Right,
tacos. Right now, it's something that we haven't experienced before.
right.
Maybe.
It defies definition in our reality because we are conscious of the fact that we are feeling a new sensation. And sure, on the aggregate, we might call that sensation a desire. I want something and it's not here. But as you go further into this nuance, you're like, but it's different than the other desires I've had. I can't name it. It just sits here and simmers and drives me nuts. And,
Oh, I've had that so many times where it's just I don't know how to interpret, explain. Yeah, yeah, I'm with you on that one.
so they say, well, keep expanding is their number one thing. I want to sit down and figure out what this is and journal on it and tackle it to the ground, as we often say in the podcast. Humans love to tackle things to the ground as soon as we feel it. Quick, define it. What is this? Get rid of the feeling. And instead, they say, keep going forward. And sometimes that means setting the feeling to the side and letting it burn, and you keep going to the next thing you know. Well, I don't know what that is, but I know I really want to go for a walk right now. I don't know what that is, but the phone's ringing and it's a friend I haven't talked to in a long time. I'm going to pick up the phone. And as I've gone further and further and further, what I've started to understand is that these two things are related. We think, because of our human perspective, that unless you are actively working on understanding the specific thing that is burning, you are not making progress on it. And what the course is putting out is actually it's a unified field of perception. So when you went on that walk, you were walking closer to that desire. When you were in an easy state and you just picked up the phone when your friend called, you were walking towards that desire. So all of these things are manifesting together. And the more we expand into perceiving and becoming conscious of these things, the easier then it is to feel the movement of these things. It's like, oh, that sense of freedom, I feel it also when I picked up the phone. That sense of freedom, I felt it when I was able to put this down and walk out the door on a walk. And so the energy that we perceive becomes more of the guiding force than the scrutiny of the difference on the five senses between journaling about that desire and taking a walk. On the five senses, we would consider these things totally different. And one is not going to make progress on the other. From the energetic perspective, actually, these things are all related. It's something that you're moving towards right now. And each time you're able to open up to the flow of what's happening in the present moment, you are expanding in the direction of those things that you're already feeling.
Wow. Yeah, I get it. So that to go back to when you started channeling, with you allowing those words to come out, allowing I'm going to say that the chorus to speak through you, were you like, oh, I don't know what the right word here is, manifesting? Were you just allowing that desire that you didn't know your desire to get healthier because you were ill at the time? Were you allowing that to occur more by just doing something that you didn't understand properly, particularly in the beginning, and just letting it go? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that's a great connection, actually. So I didn't understand this at the time. It took me a while of working with the course to realize, and I still am, realizing what allowance actually means. So the the connection you just made, which I think is beautiful, is remember when I said I couldn't get into that happy Zen place and then
Mm,
channel because I was sick and everything was a mess? I learned to allow wherever I was. And some days that was angry, or some days that was really bitter and cynical, or some days, I was in despair. And I still, on some level, allowed that to be true enough to be like, this is where I am right now. And I want to try and understand this. So I'm going to open up to channeling just as I am.
mm,
And that allowance of where we each are is actually the allowance that the Course is talking about over and over and over again. They're saying, look, you're not necessarily allowing this thing that's exterior to you or that thing that's exterior to you, although you are. That's perfectly valid perspective. You are also allowing of how you feel about these things. And in being like, I don't like that. I prefer this other thing. I don't want to do that right now. I am actually angry that I don't understand what this burning desire thing is. The faster we come to a conscious recognition of how we feel, we are seeing the beliefs that would have otherwise prevented us from letting that be true. How many times have we each felt angry and then felt like we had to go calm the F down? Because if we let that anger get the best of us, right, then something awful will happen, humans believe. And humans have centuries and millennia and perhaps more evidence in our belief system that this is true. It is a massive quadrant of our beliefs. Anger, in and of itself, is an energetic friction. It's a read of a conflict in energy between an expansive part of you that does feel something more, feel something different, and the five senses part of you that's saying, don't look at that. You can't do that now. You're not worthy. Now's not the time. Whatever all the reasons are that you have to reject that thing that you want. So the Course says to back up the chain, back up to before you felt the rage, back up to when it was just anger, back up from when it was anger to just irritation, back up from when it was irritation to just sort of this niggling thought in your head. And what was it saying? You're saying you didn't deserve that, or you couldn't do that, or it wasn't the time to do it. And it's that friction based on that part of you somewhere inside of you that knew it could be possible versus the limitation part of you that was saying all those no's. It's that friction that grows and grows and grows and grows and grows until, for humans right now who are awakening, there is some sort of outburst or some sort of, you know, physical representation of it that draws our attention to ultimately, why was I angry? And it's through that path that we walk through all of these beliefs. Well, I was angry because, I don't actually want to work at this job anymore. And like, how many of us have worked at jobs for years that we hate before we finally could just admit to ourselves that we really just don't want to do it? It
oh, yeah.
seems like the simplest thing, but until, once you get there, but sometimes it takes us a while to come around to these things that keep us in these sort of dogged patterns of responsibility and obligation that ultimately are making us unhappy. And anger brings our attention to those beliefs and those patterns.
So, okay. So, for me to try and grasp this one, if we've got an anger issue that's popping up often, it's possibly nothing to do with the thing that we seem to be angry about. We need to back up a bit, like just go back to where we first started getting this and look at,
Yeah.
why am I angry? So it could be something unrelated to what we've been talking about, or yelling at our child or our spouse, or the neighbor, or throwing rocks at our neighbor, or something like we're angry. And it's got nothing to do with what the neighbor just did, or what our child dropped their bike in the driveway. It's got nothing to do with that. It's Yeah, we feel that our car's not suitable for the needs of the family, or we hate our job, or whatever. So
Right.
so somehow we've got to back up, recognize that deal, and then you're saying if we deal with that issue, if we get a car that's more suitable for our family and we takes that anger away, or we change jobs, or we get a promotion into a different role or something, it can then, that anger in our life will subside significantly, like, or just disappear.
That is there. So let's look at two ways to go about it. That is a very effective five senses mental way to go about it. And we use this all the time, don't we? We've created psychology, therapy, we've created these fields of study, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, where we go and we look at, well, what were we thinking that precipitated that motion, right? And like we were saying, energetically or mentally, you can back up that track. But, a faster way to do this that the course suggests is actually to, again, return to, like we were talking about, allowance. So let's take that example of a guy who is real unhappy at his job, but he has a sense of obligation, a sense of responsibility that is potentially generations deep, unconsciously active within him. He is not yet conscious of how this molds his decision making and his choice making every day. Okay. But he is unhappy and happy and happy, and he's starting to have these energetic outbursts. He comes home one day, and like you said, the kid left the bike in the driveway. And let's say he gets out of the car after a long day, he trips on the bike and he gets angry. In his view, he will be angry about the bike, right? He is unconscious to the rest of this that is driving this energetic friction. Now, there's two scenarios. A therapist could like pop out of the garage, for using our imagination, say, hey there, what's got you upset? So and so left the bike in the driveway again. And then be like, tell me how that, feels. Or what does that remind you of? Right. They'd start to analyze it. Well, did your dad yell at you when you were a kid for leaving your bike in the driveway? Oh, yeah, and now we're crying. And, okay, it's a valid process, isn't it? Like we get there, we dig into eventually how we're feeling. Okay. So a slightly different way of doing this that the course is suggesting is a purely energetic way of doing it. And, to some this may sound woo, to some this may actually start making sense because once you start feeling it happen, you're like, oh, it's real. You can feel it. Okay. So let's say the chorus comes out of the garage and the chorus, there you are stomping on the bike, kicking it in the driveway, and like these loving beings flow out of the garage. And they go, we see you're angry. And you say, yeah, of course, I'm angry, blah, blah, and this and that, and I have a right to be angry, and blah, 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 and, I'm human. And they would say, we completely agree. This is amazing. We love what you're doing here. This is incredible. We wish you could see how much you are creating in this moment right now. They would just flood the situation with just the sense of total allowance. It's okay to be pissed. It's okay to kick the bike. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to be heartbroken. It's okay to be, and that okayness spreads into everything that the person is feeling. And that's usually right about the time that they say, you're right. You're totally right. And someone goes, I'm right. And then that's when the person in the experience usually starts to cry or sit down or take a deep breath because that total wave of allowance allowed them to feel what it is that they actually want, which is, in a nutshell, love. But it's also maybe that they don't want to be pissed at their kid, that they wish they weren't exhausted by their job, that they want to come home in a good mood. Now, we just spent some number of minutes using words to describe this. But for people who are awakening, you can feel, can't you? A variety of emotions as we're describing this kind of situation. And emotion moves faster than mental cognition. So if
Okay.
you can actually feel these kinds of things, you will actually move through potentially all sorts of unconscious beliefs. It's like water. It's like a wave. It just washes right through them faster than we can say, I believe this, I believe this, I inherited this from my people. We could sit here and name it, and it would take minutes to days to hours to weeks to months. Or if we open into these feeling places, it actually is a more rapid process of bringing these things to consciousness in a way that can ultimately be named down the road. As we integrate that experience, we'll say, that's the day that I realized I felt obligated to go to that job. But in that moment, it moves at an energetic speed that goes faster than thinking about it all.
Right. So the podcast is here to help men develop their intuition. And I've had episodes where I've talked about emotion. So what you're saying here is if men will allow their emotions to flow, which sounds scary, but I've heard from several different sources, and I'm not a scientist. I'm just believing what I hear here, that if an emotion hits you, on average, it'll last about 90 seconds. And as you use the analogy of water, I've used that as well too. I say to people, if the emotion comes, don't be afraid of it. It's like you're standing waist deep in the ocean and a wave comes and it hits you. You're wet, but it's like a 90-second wave where you're now engulfed in the water for maybe up to 90 seconds, and then the water recedes. You are still wet, but you are no longer engulfed in it. And you now choose to do what you want to do. You can lay down on the ground and kick your legs screaming that I'm all wet and I'm never going to get out of this. I'm going to drown. I'm going to die. And the water's all receded. And you can pretend you're still in it, but it goes. And so what you're saying there is experiencing that emotion, being immersed in that energy, emotion, energy in motion, it's going to connect the dots a lot quicker for us to realize where that anger came from.
Yes.
And I guess in this analogy too, we're using anger as, we're probably inferring that it's a bad thing, but from listening to the chorus, it's just a thing.
Yeah.
And so is joy and elation. They're just things. They're not necessarily good things. They're all bad things. They're just emotions. So energetically, and I look at our bodies too, correctly or not, as an electric being. So we've got electrical connections that are now going to be supercharged and really connected when we're letting the emotions flow, so that, yeah, okay, this
Yeah.
making sense for me. I hope a few people out there listening, it's making sense for them too.
I hope so too. Yeah. So I think, the speed. So how to say this? Let's take the example even further out. So let's say let's look down the road. I don't know, 100 years. Awakening has progressed even further. What's happening with anger then? As we're even more attuned, we're even more aware and sensitive to energy. So there will probably be fewer outbursts because we will be so aware of that friction when it first starts as a niggling thought or as a slight irritation, right? We'll catch it then. Oh, I'm doing something right now that I feel obligated to do, that a more expansive part of me doesn't think I need to do right now, or I feel differently. Okay. So now you walk up to the sink to do the dishes because they've been staring you down all weekend. And so your beliefs have been activated by a thing you visually observed in your environment over and over and over again. It's like, gotta do the dishes, gotta do the dishes. It's drumming up years of being yelled at as a child about dishes. What it all connects, right? Into the beliefs of limitation. Okay. So we get to the sink, we start doing the dishes. And did you hear my tone of voice inflect just then? We're doing the dishes. You can tell I'm already a little bit resentful of the dishes because they've been staring me down all weekend.
Mm.
So now we just walk up to the sink and we go, oh, I don't want to do this. Look at that. so clear. I don't want to do this. And you might say, Katie, this is a dumb example because who wants to do dishes? We none of us want to do dishes, right? And that's when the chorus would say to me, is it always true? I would be like, no, I would think about times I did dishes where I was talking to someone and we were laughing and we were sharing stories and I practically didn't even know dishes were getting done, right? So no, that's another belief of limitation coming up and being like, you still got to do the dishes, right? There's these parts of us that are still like obligated, 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 which is part of the masterpiece, frankly, that we built. So this is all information, and that irritation is information that there is an unconscious belief of obligation cropped up. And there is a more expanded part of you that sees a different point in time when that could get more easily or rapidly accomplished. Now, this leads into their concepts of time, which is the second book. So we won't, get too deep into that because these topics do build with
Oh
them. It
yeah, and
does,
that second book's deep for
yeah.
me anyway. Yeah.
For those who read the first book, I think they have then said the second book felt ironically very timely. They were like ready, but these topics do build and they leverage what they've already told you to explain the next thing. So, you can jump around, of course, it's at your discretion or your intuition. But if you already know the three different topics that they're using, that they're merging together to explain the next thing, it is a lot less sort of energetic and mental work to get there. Okay. So we'll just touch on this briefly and say these are often perceptions of time and timeliness and energetic flow. When the broader part of you comes in and is like, are you crazy? I don't want to do dishes right now. I was flowing and enjoying the universe, and these beliefs dragged me over to the sink. What it is expressing to you is often a perception of what we might simply say energetic flow, that thing is not flowing in that moment. But another equally valid way of saying that is it's not time for that. There is another point in time that your energy perceives where that thing will get done. And it feels like a friction because you are not yet in that moment in time. So anger is actually very informative. All emotions are actually very informative. We're just right at the cusp of understanding that we even feel these things and how rapidly we feel them, that we don't have our, 18th, 19th, and 20th senses fully developed to be like, oh, I feel the sense of time with this, and I'm going to move over into this one. And oh, now I feel it. I'm going to walk into the kitchen, and you walk into the kitchen right as your partner walks in. And then because you're in there doing the dishes, you end up having this most amazing conversation with your partner. Right. So the energy knows more pieces of information that are coming in that relate to ultimately flow, connection, and time. You didn't know you needed to have that conversation with your partner. You didn't even know that conversation was missing. You didn't even know they had something they wanted to talk about deeply. You just know that it's not time for the dishes yet. And then you go off and do another thing. And then, you feel a draw to do the dishes. And then it coincides with all sorts of other things. So the more we embrace these emotions, the more we are opening to the information they represent, the more we are likely to have expanded conscious experiences of flow.
Wow. And so then I guess the challenge there too is if we do develop this and if one person started to get into this flow and recognize the resistance at certain times and started to do a certain activity at a different time, someone else may then come along and say, why is that not done? Because I wanted this done, I wanted that, and then I guess we've got to tune into that too and try and
Yes.
explain ourselves. Everyone's got their limitations and all our preconceived things, like you say. Yeah, so
Yes.
it's yeah. But
Yeah.
then I
It
guess
is.
the universe
Okay.
has recognized that other person would come in and say that. So they would be trying to make it all fit to adapt to who you're likely to bump into today. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a process. And, part of this process is running these experiments. So you get pissed and you let yourself get angry. And then you realize kind of what it was telling you. And then, the next time you try and maybe hold back or not get as angry. And does that work? And no, there was something about the outburst that expressed something that you got that last time. Right. So you're playing with what you are learning by way of experiencing these things. And the course says you're doing it by going through it. Sometimes there is no way to skip the angry outburst or the depressive episode on the couch or the nights of anxiety in your house. There's no way to skip the emotion to get the information out of the emotion. So like you were saying earlier, you're in the water, might as well let the water wash over you, and you'll be surprised how quickly it passes. As that happens, one of the things that we release is another massive quadrant of beliefs, which is about guilt and shame. So connecting to the incident, example that you just brought up about like, well, what happens when someone walks in and yells at you about the dishes, right? Okay. Oftentimes, as we have a lot of these platitudes that we say to ourselves, 99% of what we worry about doesn't happen, right? So more often than not, it's the fear of being yelled at, this sense of guilt and what it generates that is more a palpable aspect of our realities day in and day out than the actual thing that we feel we are fearing that would make us feel guilty. It's the imagination of the guilty event.
Oh, I'm hearing you there. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
if you've gone the path of, look, I've been playing with this, I feel differently about my anger, I think I'm understanding it. Oh, yeah, I really am. Like, wow, I really don't want to do the dishes right now. More often than not, when someone comes in and they say, why aren't the dishes done? If you are in that space, you can actually answer honestly without the fear of that guilty event. You answer just honestly. Right. It just didn't feel aligned. And I've kind of been waiting for the moment that it felt aligned. Would you be patient with my experiment? Or sometimes that's all you have to say because you come from that place. And then the person feels your permission to be where they are too. And it actually is contagious. And they actually are almost glad, that you said that. And, usually you can potentially like hug or they kind of exhale and be like, I had such a hard day. And, then they realize that their anger wasn't actually about the dishes.
Mm, yeah. Okay, excellent. Something that a word I don't think I've heard in the podcasts that I want to run by and see whether the chorus have raised the term synchronicity. I've had many synchronistic moments in my life that have been life-changing because I've chose to follow them. Um, did the chorus talk about synchronicities much or not at all? Or?
So it's in the second book, and the second book is their treatment of time and memory. So I'll just describe for the listeners. So in the first book, which is the overview of the awakening process from the Course's perspective, they lay out what they call the three engines of reality, which are time, distance, and body. So the second book is their treatment of this first engine, which is time and memory. So synchronicity does come up. It comes up in the sense of loosening sort of the human connection to linearity. So we express this idea of a straight line in more than just the way we look at our history. We go through our days with a plan, a straight line of what we're going to get done. We go through our lifetimes with sometimes a mental projection of what our lifetime should look like. We go into a relationship actually with a projection, a mental projection of how this will proceed. So they suggest that as we loosen up from these lines, we experience what we call a synchronicity, which is sort of an unplanned convergence of desired events. It's unplanned because it fell off the line, or we did. It's not anything we ever thought could happen. I never could have imagined I would have sat down on the train next to that guy, and that guy was looking to hire a person who does this. And so these synchronistic events are like, wow, that was a thing I wanted. And I never could have planned to get it done in that way. And I never could have even orchestrated all those things, to happen. And that's because they said, well, some part of you that's expanding went off the lines. And maybe you had a plan to do it this way, but you felt an intuition, getting back to intuition. You felt an intuition to just take the early train. And so you did. And all that work that you'd done in feeling your emotions and letting the emotions just be felt attunes you to more and more of what you're feeling. And so that morning, when that intuition or that inspiration came up, I think I'll just take the early train. Or sometimes it's not even a thought. You're like, I don't know. I just got up out of bed and I was ready. So I just walked down to the train station, right? It's not even a clear desire. That puts you onto this flowing place where there's synchronistic events occur or are more likely to occur.
Mm. Yeah, I know, because for me, we had years ago, we used to live overseas on a little island in the middle of the Pacific. We had a scuba dive resort. And through circumstances, my wife and I fully agreed it was time to sell up, move back to Australia, and be with our family. Well, a lot of people dream of living on a scuba dive resort, like on a tropical island near the equator in the middle of nowhere, but very few people actually want to do it. So the market to sell it is very limited. And a year before that, I'd done a crowdfunding thing and raised well over $40,000 to put solar panels on the resort because the electricity costs were astronomical on that little spot. So I'd done that and that had worked well. And then I'm sort of sitting there trying to work out, how to price the business, all the information I'm needing to get together. And I just had this thought, I wonder if I could use the crowdfunding platform to like move the business on somehow. And I'm like, and then I thought, I wonder if I could raffle it. And then I thought, and then that thought went gone. It was just, a weird thought. Who thinks of doing that? Gone. A couple of days before, our oldest son had arrived on the island unannounced, which was extremely unusual. Like, because we live so remotely that anyone that was coming to visit always had to bring a suitcase full of something that we needed, spare parts or chocolate or something from somewhere. And he just lobbed up. So the next day he walks into my office and says, Dad, you got a few minutes to talk about selling the business? I said, sure, sit down. And he had a notepad with pages of notes on it. And he said, you're going to think this is crazy, like da, 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 da. But he said, I think you should raffle the business off. And I'm like, here's 2 days in a row, this same word appeared out of nowhere. And it was just like, I said, okay, tell me. So he's starting to tell me a bit more. And then I possibly cut him off after a couple of minutes and said, mate, you don't have to convince me anymore. I'm on board. And he's like, I think it was a bit early for him. He's like, whoa. And I said, but you have to go and talk to your mother. Because I'm thinking, I can't have this conversation with her. My wife's more conservative than I am, let's say that. I'm the one who chose to move us to the middle of, 3 little boys, sell up everything, resign my state government job as a firefighter and move to a tropical island in the middle of nowhere in our late 20s. And anyway, so I said, so he goes and takes his mum on a 2-hour walk up the beach and back, comes back, goes, it's happening. That went so crazy well. It took us 14 months to put it together. We thought in 3 months we'll have this thing down. We'd have a platform and a website and everything. We worked nonstop. And we, at the end of the day, when it was all over, in our bank, we had 3 times the amount of cash than we would have been happy to receive for that business had we sold it to it as in a normal process. And a new person owns the place now, and it all went, and it was just like, it was like we won the raffle, like and it was too synchronistic, and I just followed it. And like, so what you were saying before, it's something it's already there. We haven't seen the manifestation of it, but the success, the end product of that raffle had already occurred because there was no time, and we were
Mhm.
now just stepping into it. And with me, because I'd had other synchronistic moments in my life that weren't quite as unusual as that one, I just was like, oh, okay, I've got to follow. Like, it's he's flown over here
Yeah.
without telling us he was even coming, and he's got this grandiose plan. And then he did. So the whole plan was, then he's like he had it formulated out. We, sat down and nutted it all out and brainstormed it and continued to brainstorm it till everything happened. And yeah, so that was, I believe in
That's awesome.
synchronicities. I can tell you, like, it's, yeah, these things
I'm
happen,
thinking
and it
now,
just,
what can I raffle?
yeah. Oh man, we had 750 emails after that raffle from people going, "Can you help me raffle my car, my pet
Oh,
shop,
yeah.
my scuba dive resort, like, it was like, oh my goodness, like
A
it
whole
was
other
just,
business.
yeah, yeah.
Raffle
Everyone just
consultant.
thought, oh, this is easy. It's not easy, I can tell you, but there
Yeah.
was ease in it because we just knew it's what was supposed to happen. We just,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. There was always, what about this? What about that? But there was always an answer because it had already happened. It was already there. We just had to, I guess, pull the facade down piece by piece so that we could see the end product at the end.
Mm.
And me saying to him, yeah, let's just do it. One piece came down, him taking his mother for a walk on the beach for 2 hours to talk about it and discuss it, but just
Yeah.
pulled it down so that we could slowly, the facade came down and we could see the end product, which was the raffle complete over the new owner in there. And yeah.
It's beautiful. And I think that brings up like an energetic aspect to synchronicity that maybe as we first start experiencing these things is overlooked. Sometimes what I think in the beginning, I focused on the synchronistic events about like what it got me, the five senses, like, oh, like that bill got paid or the, whatever. And now as I feel more of these experiences myself and through the experiences of others, I feel through synchronistic events that there is a greater aspect of connection or harmony or alignment, right? You could have planned, I'm going to fly out my son, we'll have a meeting, I'll have a meeting and then I'll fly him out and then I'll meet with my wife. Okay. And all of those things could have happened as planned mentally, right? And maybe the conversations would have been productive. But isn't there something magically connective about a synchronistic event where your son just shows up and he has the same idea that you did? And then he's there and he's willing to go on a walk, with your wife and they're aligned and your family's together on the island. And you see, the way these things manifest are representative of often that larger connection to what we would call flow. That even if we plan them that way, those plans have that resonance of thinking, evaluating, putting it down, right? And synchronicity has that sensation of like, well, I feel like I just tapped into a different level of reality here where we were connected in other ways more than just talking on the phone and planning him to fly out here. That's one way to connect. Or there's this other way of just like, wow, we were in such harmony about something. And I think that's part of kind of the beauty of these synchronistic events and kind of what we're all feeling as finally the difference. These things are different, yes, in the five senses way they play out, but they're really different in the way that they feel.
Oh yeah. And yeah, it was great that at the end of it, we had more money in the bank than we, you know, had planned to. But that was nothing as you said, in comparison to the experience of the whole thing, the energy of the whole thing, the excitement, the emotions that it could, and like it was emotional roller coaster. Like, I can remember after we drew the raffle that night, we just fell into bed, like, because for the last week like, so in the beginning, my son's just the ultimate planner. He's onto the web hosting people and all that sort of stuff, saying we need like a server of this size and all this to handle volume of tickets. This is before we've even attempted to sell one ticket. And they laughed at him. They said, mate, you're not running a Bruce Springsteen concert where everybody goes online at 9 a.m. on this day and they all try and buy one of 10,000 tickets because there's and that's it. Like, and everyone's going to be you're running the raffle over 3 months. Like, you're never going to get a surge. Yeah, right. The last week, it went ballistic. We could have sold
Wow.
30 to 40% more tickets, probably 50% more tickets in that last week than we did easily. We broke the server multiple times. We were on the phone ringing them saying, open, and they would flick a switch somewhere, and they would just, because we were ringing them so often and so aggravated that because our website was
Wow.
crashing constantly, and they just said, all right, we've turned it on full speed for the next 2 hours, which meant like it was 50 times more than what we'd paid for. And it wasn't we were trying to cheapskate it. We went off their advice. What we needed was an Amazon server, because the Amazon servers, apparently they're
Yeah.
global, and whenever
Yeah.
they just move you around the planet, so they never crash. And, you know, we I had people emailing us saying, if you will sell me 10 tickets, because I cannot get onto your website to buy the things, if you'll sell me 10, I'll donate $5,000 to the charity of your choice. But I couldn't accept the offer because I couldn't get on the website to release 10 tickets. It was so frozen. And then
Wow.
and then when they would do their thing and totally we had to literally unplug our website, plug it back in. They would unplug and do their thing, and then it just went crazy, and you could watch it and you could see the ticket sales. It's just going, it was just going intense because multiple media outlets in the last couple of days got hold of it, and we had a deadline, at this time on this day it was over, and it was insane. So
Wow.
the experience of that, just to experience the emotion and the decision making
Mm.
process behind the scenes of making it all legitimate and perfect, and the temptation to not meet the deadline, let the ticket sales continue with all these people begging us to buy tickets. It was just,
Wow.
and the emails we got with people saying, I know it's not drawn for another 2 months, but you've given me so much hope. And I know I probably won't win it, but now I can dream for 2 months that I might win it. And we would be crying, like reading these
Wow.
emails. It was just, we got the odd gnarly comment, like scam or something like that on little
Mm.
blog posts here and there. But I silenced them very quickly because I would go onto the blog and I would say, hi, I'm Doug. I'm the owner of the resort. I'm running the raffle. Please ask me your questions. And they were just silence, they were all silenced up, like,
Wow.
yeah. But yeah, yeah, like you say, the manifested result at the end was nice, but the whole experience, and like, I'm starting to feel the energy and the emotion of the whole thing again, like just talking to you about it. And when we talk about it with the kids, and that, like, it was such a roller coaster of emotional time. It that the experience was just worth 1,000 times of what the physical, the manifested result of the bank account at the end. It was, yeah. So for those listening, follow those synchronistic moments. And of course, that wasn't the first synchronistic moment in my life I'd followed. I knew what it was. Because I could recognize them, through in previous years. And I think many years ago, they used to come weeks apart, whereas now they'll come much shorter amount of time. Like, we're just ready, like they're hours apart, these unusual things. Like, I look at them as signposts from the universe. It's like,
Yeah.
Doug, stop and read this sign. It's important. Like, it was before I would glance at stuff like that and I couldn't even see the words on the thing,
Right.
or it was blurry, and just keep walking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we build on it, and yeah.
And often because we're mentally churning. right? You can't see the sign because you're busy already living the first meeting of your day in your head as you drive to work. So you completely miss the billboard on the side of the road that's like, synchronistic moment this way or, calls to you in some way. And so, I think a lot of it has to do with being able to be in the feeling place of what we're getting in the present moment. I think that's the big to do. I think when, some people come into this from outside of woo circles, one of the questions might be like, what's all this about being present?
Mm,
And we could say like, oh, it's, stepping out of your stress or whatever, it's being in your body. It's, but I think ultimately what happens is as you step into a present moment, you are expanding into the fullness of what you can perceive with your five senses or with your energy. And so when that happens, you are able to pick up on these synchronistic signposts that you otherwise would have been so busy, like with your nose in your coffee and working on the stuff. They're there, but we just didn't see them, according to the course, because of what we came here to experience, which was our nose in the coffee cup, which was an experience of limitation.
and that's what I loved, because the nose in the coffee cup isn't a bad thing. Us
No.
being ignorant, us just, living the grind and not being happy with what's going on is okay. It's not like in the past, I've always been striving to get away from that kind of life. But hearing what the chorus have got to say and others, it's like, oh, okay, what these things I don't particularly enjoy or don't understand aren't as bad. They're just experiences that, yeah. And maybe you don't want to do that every day forever. You maybe want to have some different experiences. So try something different. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I love about it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, I've heard the word synchronicity before, but I really hadn't, I couldn't explain it to anyone. I had no idea what it really meant. And they're like, well, I kind of like what I heard then, and I get what Doug's saying. I'm not going to go into some big, amazing synchronistic moment day one. But what could people do? And I know it's not about doing, but how could they start to align themselves, get themselves into a place where they can see the signposts, where they can stop and read the words and it's not a blur? Any
Mhm.
suggestions?
Well, I think, as usual, we can give a few different perspectives on that, type of question. Let's take three different kinds of answers. The first one might be what we often tell each other, which is try to fill in the blank. And one way to fill in the blank with this would be to be more present, right? To just be more in the moment, lean into the things that you're feeling in the present, right? Be present. So that's good advice. It's not always easy when you're a human because we built vast galactic beliefs about how to limit those perceptions, which
So,
is what
so
we're
just
awakening to.
to
Go ahead.
clarify that, to be in the present, it's just like, do you mean like forget about what happened yesterday, forget about what's going to happen tomorrow, just try and for a little while, and it's difficult to think about now. Is that
Yep.
what you're meaning?
Yeah, and notice how we say think, right? So
Mm,
when we're sitting here thinking about tomorrow, you say forget about tomorrow, forget about yesterday. Well, technically those aren't happening right now, except in
true.
our heads.
Mm.
Our head is busy creating an imaginary yesterday and an imaginary tomorrow. Okay. So thank you, mind, for distracting us, into this experience of limitation for a really long time. It's been like a total wild ride. Thank you, brain. And now I would like to just be more aware of what's in the room right now that I am perceiving with my five senses. Now we might say the five senses were so limited. Yeah, maybe, but their energetic perception, our read of the visible wavelengths of light is our eyes right now. We are reading energy with our eyes. So they count. So if you come into the present moment, what you are coming into is a full awareness of what you are energetically perceiving, whether that energy is with the eyeballs, the ears, or with a sixth sense. Now, the mind, as we're awakening, won't let you do that for a really long time because we created an environment of survival and doing and action. So there's only so long you can sit there and kind of just perceive the room before your brain's like, shouldn't we have gone and turned on the oven by now? I think we're really late for work, right? It'll start giving you all of these get up and go, survive, 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 survive. So that's okay. It still counts, right? Every time you bring your conscious awareness to the present, you build an experience of the present, which builds a belief. And those beliefs begin to accrue. That's how we build the muscle. You start to build a muscle of the present moment, of being present, of feeling those things, of seeing that synchronicity. And then you can say to yourself, okay, brain, I hear you about my nose in the coffee cup, but last time I was present, I took an early train ride and I got a job offer. So that seems pretty valid, right? And that belief helps us balance these things, right? We're building an alternate to the belief system that kept us limited. We build an alternate, build that muscle, build that endurance to do those things. But, I think a simple, maybe a more simple answer even to that question is what the Course would say, which is awakening is assured. It is inevitable. We are all doing it. Anyone who chooses to do it, you can't fail. You really can't mess it up. You can go through awakening with your nose in the coffee cup. You can go through awakening getting on a train. You can go through awakening kicking the bike in the driveway or doing the dishes or not doing the dishes. You can wake up one morning and say, I'm going to lay on the couch all day and see if I get fired. You can go to work and work the hardest you ever have. All of these are experiences of these wavelengths of energy, of this reality that we signed up for, and we are the ones who are awakening and expanding. So no matter how hard we try to stay asleep, you will realize something when you kick the bike. You will realize something when you go to work and work hard. You will realize something when you do the dishes or when you don't. There will be something in every single one of these experiences that connects you even deeper into the stuff you feel, the stuff you hadn't, the things you want, the things you really, really want. It will just help you do more of this because you're doing it by going through it. Whatever way you go through it, you're doing it.
All right, so that's presence. That's the first one that you're suggesting. And did I miss something in there, or was there the other two steps?
Yeah, I think give yourself permission to be human is the second one, maybe, if we
Right. So
summarize it.
and in your
The
explanation
first one,
there, it
yeah,
was very much that the dishes,
the first one is a doing, and we need that still. We're still human, right? So if you need something to do, try being in the present moment. Journal about it, feel it, log it, right? Like if you need to effort into something, and sometimes we do, we have
Mm.
to effort it a little bit still. We're human. Then do that. And if you're looking for an energetic type of way to be present, it's giving yourself permission to feel however you feel in the present moment. If you're angry, if you're disappointed, if you're sad, if you're lazy, if you're feeling ambition, whatever that feeling is, you just come into that in the present moment. Be like, this is where I'm at. And that also builds the muscle of the present moment.
Yeah. So be in the present moment, be human. And what was our other one?
Can't remember now.
Sorry?
I can't remember now. I'm
That's okay.
having a human moment of forgetting.
I remember I had one a week ago when we chatted and like, yeah,
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 that's a
and
good
I was
one.
like, yeah, it's cool.
Uh,
Good. I'm just looking at my notes here. Um, and there's a quote, and again, I can't remember if it's from podcast or from your book, and it says, they didn't come, meaning they, the chorus, didn't come looking for us. We showed up at their door and they were delighted. So I'm wondering, like, how did we find them? Like, was it a widening? Like, did your frequency range widen so that you could perceive them, or Because like
Mhm.
when you said that they didn't come looking for us, I had just assumed like, like they came looking and they's like, oh, here's Katie. She's on our wavelength. Let's talk through her. And it's
Right.
like when I've read that, like they didn't come looking for us. We found them. I'm like, what the? Like, please explain that one.
It's an interesting human perspective, isn't it? Because I think
Mm,
a lot of channeled messages come through and not good, not bad, just they are a different perspective, are here to fix or save humanity, quite
mm.
frankly. They
Yeah,
have
yeah,
they
I hear you
wanted
on
to
that.
come through, they wanted a mouthpiece, they've got to tell us how to fix this quick because humanity's messing it up. Which is the perspective, right? Can't argue with that. I can see evidence of that. But the chorus doesn't have that perspective. They think this is all pretty amazing, all the aspects of the limitation. So they didn't feel like they needed to find me or someone and send messages through books. They didn't feel that way at all. And instead, they say that our ability to have resonated with them, and I'll explain why it's our and not just me, Katie, in just a second, but our ability to have resonated to a place where we can receive their perspective as a podcast, as a book, as this interview right now, right? We're manifesting this right now in our reality. Their viewpoints are here now. And they said that that happened because we are to a point in our awakening, in our expansion, in our allowing, we might say, where we've reached a frequency where they are, where we can stumble into a group of beings who are that loving. And the reason why I say it's not just me is because I'm a part of this belief system too. So I'm human. If you have a human belief, I share that human belief. I resonate with it in some way. Now, I may look different. My life may manifest slightly differently, but hey, I walk around in a human body. I'm scared of things. I get frustrated. I share all of it. And so I couldn't just shoot off into a different frequency and meet the chorus and still be perceivable by the rest of humanity if I wasn't also vibrating here, if I wasn't also human. I'm part of the pack. And so basically, what they're saying is, hey, look at that. Your pack expanded. Your whole group did. And, you guys have reached this loving place, which overlaps with our loving place. And hey, maybe Katie ended up being the volunteer who wrote the things, but you perceive Katie and Katie perceives you, which means you guys are on the same frequency and we're on the same frequency. And we didn't sign up for the experience of limitation like you guys did, which means we didn't move, you guys did. You expanded out to our loving frequencies and can now hear us, even from the human perspective that you're in.
So that's a little bit like our inventors over the last few hundred years, the whoever invented the radio. And they first, I mean, so obviously they developed a receiver and a sender. So someone sent a radio signal out, and now we're perfecting and we've worked out how to receive that first signal, but it's obviously it's not the chorus. And then we've adapted the sending and the receiving of the radio frequency. And yeah, and I remember when I was a kid, like I'm a fair bit older than you, my first car, it had a push button radio, and it was only AM. We only got AM channels. And then when I was, I guess, in my late teens, probably nearly 20 years old, before we got an FM station. And then I needed to get a new radio to tap in. So I guess, that was technology. Someone's invented these physical things that
Yeah.
would tap into unseen realms and forces. So, and I mean, I probably should have said something like this early on in the podcast. If you think what Katie's doing is really weird and out there, and it's just wrong, this is just not right. Because I used to think like that many, many, many years ago, that this would be weird.
Me too.
When you're listening to a radio or watching your television, you've got this frequency that's unseen. It comes through the air into your voodoo device, which is
Yeah.
these days, your cell phone or your TV or whatever it is, or it's coming through the airwaves to the antenna on your car. and you're
Yeah.
hearing it. So now we've developed as a the you know the human race some technology unseen where we can now start to tap into the chorus's frequency. Is that
Yeah.
a reasonable
Yeah.
analogy?
Beautiful analogy. And it ties into something they've said, which is you guys are the instruments. You're moving past this experience of needing something apart from you, like a machine,
Mm,
in order to vibrate into the places of your desire. It's an interesting crossover, right? Like we want to be able to travel more rapidly. And so we've progressed from, horse and buggy, steam engine, now jet airplane, right? We're achieving that desire of maybe getting to places more rapidly. And they're saying within these next machines or what have you are going to be even more closely integrated into your energies, your desires. You'll change where you're feeling, you'll shift your frequency, and you'll interact even more directly with the energy around you. The early precursor of this is, have you ever walked into a room, felt the energy of the room, and then been able to stay in a happy place anyways, right?
mm,
Okay. Now let's just say the room is maybe, this neighborhood or this reality or this time. And then you want to maybe vibrate in a slightly different way. And that might take you into a different room or a different reality or different time, right? It's the same concept. It's the same concept of you perceive what a frequency feels like. You recognize you want to feel a different way. And somehow you're able to hold that way. You hold that happy place or hold that uplifted feeling. You don't let that Debbie Downer get you down, right? Same concept, extrapolated into maybe a larger context. So
mm.
I do think, hey, we started with radios and now we've got people who hear this, right? Maybe the in between step was when, we all had those metal filings in our teeth and we heard the radio in our heads. Right? So, we're stumbling sometimes even into these discoveries and awakening, but we're finding easier, more rapid and more direct ways to get to or bring about the things that we desire.
Yeah. It just reminded me of getting like, we're tuning in and hearing things we want to hear. When I was a teenager, we had an old black and white TV and we lived about probably 2 miles, 3 miles from the local main hospital. And they had a paging system that would come through our TV. We'd be sitting at 7 o'clock at night watching TV, and there'd be this beep, 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 Dr. Davis, please report, a code red or whatever, and, room 704 or something. Like,
Oh man.
really? Yeah. And we'd come through our TV. Like, and we lived miles from the hospital. And then I know someone else at our school, I heard them talking, and they lived much closer to the hospital than we did. And they got it all the time as well. So we
Oh
we're getting
yeah.
unwanted frequencies there, yeah, it's crazy. And I think it's interesting, like I've never made one, but I know they have children's radio sets with crystals in, like
Yeah.
so it's like people think, new age weird people with their crystals and that. It's like, well, you got a radio, like that's how they made radios, with
Yeah.
crystals, because they
Yeah.
pick up frequencies and
Totally.
yeah, it's
Great
interesting.
connection. Yeah, the piezoelectric effect. I mean, it's the reason why we like crystalline structures in engineering is because they work well and they're based on crystalline structures of crystals.
Mm,
They transmit energy well. They're efficient vibrators, that energy moves through these structures really well.
yeah,
So, when you see a crystal shop, I mean, you can look at it as like, a bunch of new age, weird rocks, or also they're just really, really efficient engineering parts.
yeah,
It's a
yeah,
whole shop of efficient engineering parts, depending on what your application is.
yeah. I was reading a book a few years ago by a lady called Eileen McCusack, and she talks about using tuning forks, like you would tune a piano with, to tune the human biofield. And so she explains all that, and she was having amazing success with that. And then one day she had a client come along, and they had this big fancy crystal, and she said, I'd like you to use this with the tuning fork. And she's like, a bit weird, like, Anyway, she did, and she put it on, and she said it was just literally an amplifier. It
Yeah.
just she would, because she never would ever physically touch the patients with the tuning fork before. It was just the resonance from it. It would pick up dissonance somewhere in the body, and then the resonance from the fork would change and release that trapped energy in the body without physically touching it, just from the vibration. But then she was physically using the crystal to touch a certain part of the person's body, and then putting the end of the tuning fork on the crystal, so there was physical touch through. And yeah, she said it was very unexpectedly, but very the real amplification of what was going
Yeah.
on. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Water can have similar properties, right? Water can be vibrated into crystalline structures. So I think there's
Mm.
a lot that will combine crystal and water in the years to come because they're really powerful as amplifiers of energy.
Yep. Yeah. Now, as I've told you, the podcast's all about, try and make it mostly about men, reasons why they should, and then how to develop their intuition. And last week I asked you, when we had our little chat, about the male female thing, where women's intuition, I mean, traditionally in this Western world we live in, when you say the word intuition, you don't usually use men's with it. It would be more women's intuition. Have the chorus ever mentioned anything with men or women with intuition, or do they just see it as one big thing?
And yeah, it's such a good question. And as we talked about, no, they haven't. They don't get that specific in terms of describing their view of things. They haven't gotten that granular. Now, we might not think of male female as very granular. We might think of that as a pretty meta topic for our civilization, but to them, it's definitely an expression on the five senses. Right? We perceive predominantly currently the difference between a male female by the way they look. So as we move into energetic places, we might come up with much more nuanced and diverse ways of understanding each other at energetic levels that build upon or amplify the male female. And I think this is an important aspect of what the course has done too. Every time they give a new definition, it never negates anything we've experienced before. It enhances it. It helps understand why we might have experienced reality in that way. So I don't think from the chorus's perspective there's anything we're about to discover where we're going to be like, oh man, we were so wrong to think of that as male female. Like that's not allowing, right? That's not loving. So rather, I think they would say that we'll come into maybe even a deeper or broader understanding of what it means to be masculine or feminine, and this may lean into ideas of divine, as they say, masculinity and femininity, that there may be much, much, much more to these distinctions, these energies, these representations, what they are capable of, where they came from, how they ended up in this limitation in this way, who we are on an energetic level, how that reflects itself in whether we are masculine or feminine, right? I think there's so much more to this topic. But to put it in a simple way in terms of today, I would say that if we look at it from the perspective the chorus does, which is about beliefs, and we've already been talking sort of today about how, intuition, inspiration, and desire are all related to our permission that we give ourselves to feel things in the present moment. I think we could reasonably say that there are more beliefs in our belief system in aggregate as a society that support women feeling things wholesale than men feeling things. And I think that really is the first step, and it's an underestimated first step. That the more men are given permission, agency, safe spaces, support, and actually feeling what they're feeling, the men may find that not only is their intuition right there underneath the surface, it is not as deep of a dig as I think some men think it is. But also, I do think that the masculine intuition will tap into different aspects of information than the feminine aspects of intuition. If we consider ourselves, as we've been talking about, energetic perceivers of information, And there are real differences between masculine and feminine energies, whether you consider those discrete or on a continuum. I think we will find that there are sort of inherent or innate abilities that are reflected in each of these things in different ways. I think the masculine intuition, we're going to learn some incredible things about what it does uniquely, why it's constructed that way, how it was prevented, I think, in this experience of limitation that will be unique to that aspect versus the feminine and the feminine intuition.
Love that. And it just reminded me, I've been wanting for a year or more now to put together a guided meditation specifically for men. And it didn't give me any ideas there, but when you talked about the different energy for men, well, I'm thinking, yes. And I've come up with a few, but I'm like, you know what? That's not specific to men. And I'll just put it on the back burner. And I keep thinking, one day I'll grasp something that when men listen to it, they'll go, oh, yeah. And it's and it's not that women couldn't listen to it and benefit from it as well, but it'll be more, because I've listened to some guided meditations that are actually very tailored to women, and I didn't realize it. And it's like, yeah, you're talking about your human anatomy here right now that I don't have.
Mm.
Like, yeah, okay, yeah. It was very tailored to ladies, to the divine
Mm.
feminine, and yeah. So you've
Yeah.
inspired me just a little bit more to intuitively get some info to put together for men. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they're different. And, I think this is maybe just an interpretation. I don't think it's a hard and fast thing. But I think as men give themselves permission to feel things, may have a tendency to feel things initially that a woman might not feel things initially. That is to say, like, let's say there's like a line of emotions we give ourselves permission to feel, and the first one steps up. I think emotionally, women, that maybe that first one past all the positive ones, right? We're all okay with everyone feeling positive emotions, like 100%. Any of those, great. Okay. It's really the negative ones, let's say. Okay. So here comes a queue of negative emotions, and they're all lined up for men and for women. I think the first negative emotion that women give themselves permission to feel are maybe what we would broadly classify as the sad ones. Women are okay to cry with each other, right? Okay. I think sometimes there's an assumption that that's going to be the first one in the line for men. I'm
Yeah,
not sure that's
absolutely.
necessary. It may be,
Mm.
but I wonder sometimes if men might feel maybe the fiery emotions first. Like, I think sometimes men really need to get things out through anger, as we've been talking about, that they express that emotion in a very different way. Okay. Well, if you have a woman with you in the room and she's okay with sadness, but anger is five emotions away from what she's okay with receiving for herself.
Mhm.
Excuse me, right? She hasn't given herself permission yet for that one. Like, she's okay with being sad. Okay. So she's probably totally okay with you being sad because, she already gave herself permission for that one. But is she okay with you angry? Maybe that's scary, right? Maybe it's really scary to be around an angry dude for a lot of physical reasons of safety, right? But also for a lot of emotional reasons. So I think the more men and women give themselves permission to do this differently, the faster we will step into what we each feel differently in our own interpretations of energy, intuition being one of them. And I think, however, men can create those spaces where they can feel what it is that they're feeling, to separate themselves from the female aspect. Because I think I know a lot of good guys. None of them want to terrify their partners, period. So if you're going to feel something and you feel like that may not affect your partner positively, that is another reason to not feel that, even subconsciously, that will follow you around the room. That's why I think there are really healthy and positive reasons for men to hang out with men to feel these things because you've automatically removed any of the concern that you have as a protector and a caretaker of any females in your life.
Oh no, I hear you there. That makes so much sense. And I guess what I sort of gathered there was if men can feel those emotions, they can go straight to emotion number 5, like anger,
Yeah.
away from those they nurture and care for,
Yeah.
and experience it and let it happen. Like sit in that emotion. Like I, I have hungered for years for men to sit and talk with and have conversations like this. One of the reasons I've started the podcast is this. And yesterday, I released my third men's group recording as a podcast. So now I've got guys who've been on this podcast before who are all around the world. And every 2 weeks, we've just started to get together on Zoom. And
Awesome.
last week, the first 2 weeks, we talked about intuition because it's what I want to talk about. Last week, we talked about what's our greatest fear. And holy shit, there was 6 of us sitting there. The conversation, like it came out yesterday. If you want to hear it, it's all
Yeah.
there. I had to edit it slightly because one of the guys' internet connection was pretty bad and he dropped off 2 or 3 times. But apart from that, it's raw and ready. Everyone knew potentially going to be a podcast. And yeah, and so we're talking about our greatest fears and the stuff the guys come out. And like some of these guys are like very serious coaches, like they're coaching high level people, all sorts of people. And they've been through a lot and they've helped a lot of people, a lot of men. And so the stuff that's pouring out of them, it was just beautiful, like to listen to, and
That's awesome.
satisfies a need of mine. I get to hang around with these guys and experience their energy. And I'm sort of more just a facilitator. I'm just, like, oh, yeah, I can see your hand up, you talk next, and then the guys are
Yeah.
just sharing. And it's amazing. And
That's
of course,
awesome.
and we're not swearing or going crazy or whatever. I think I might have dropped the F word once last week, but, it's mild that way. Um, and I wish we were all physically in person, but
Yeah.
I'm getting very used to Zoom and I feel emotions over Zoom,
Yeah.
and last week we had that conversation for a while and I got a little bit emotional there at one stage. It just, yeah, so I'm still experiencing it. And yeah, so it's great. So I guess if the guys
Mm.
can tap in and take your advice, and it's like, yeah, sadness is probably the first emotion on the ladies' list. And it's not like
Maybe. Yeah.
it's not, yeah, maybe it is, maybe it's not. Whatever you think your first one is, experience it, but try and do it
Right.
in an environment where others aren't
Mm.
around initially, so that when it does pop up, when they are around, you are far more experienced at experiencing that emotion, and you're not having to use a support system such as alcohol, drugs, or other unusual things to try and
Yeah.
subdue
Numb it
that
out.
emotion. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes, I'm not a guy, so I'm speaking out of turn, but I can understand how if you hear about sharing emotions and your only example to draw upon are things you have seen at arm length done by groups of women,
Mm, mm,
and you say to yourself, well, I don't want that. Right. I don't want to sit around and cry, with a bunch of my guy friends, right? If that's your only framework,
mm,
then I can understand why that might not appeal to some guys, right? Because maybe the first emotion they need to express is, maybe something more fiery, maybe something more, energized, and they're not seeing that. And they take the female representation of that as the representation of what it means to be in touch with your emotions. And it's not. That's not only a female flavor, but maybe it was a particular night on a particular topic, and who knows.
mm.
So I think each person, regardless of male or female or where they are on whatever spectrum and whatever axes, and all of us have to say, what's this thing that's coming up for me that I need to express? I need to whatever pound cushions and yell with other people. I need to, just admit that I'm really depressed and I try and put on a happy face in front of my family all the time. Can I please just find a place where it's okay to just be totally depressed, right? That's the emotion you need.
Mm.
Then find the people who are okay with your pantheon of emotions and just get to that one first. And you start there. But it's like you said, it's the safe space. It's the people you connect with. Maybe it's all dudes, maybe it's not. It's up to you. But I do think that there are some of these natural differences between male and female. And I think men will find it much more easy and much more fun, quite frankly, when they find the places that allow them to express who they are.
Yeah. I know I went to a energy clearing workshop in California many years ago for 5 days. And at the end of it, we were doing this particular thing on the last night. And we'd learned a lot of stuff, and there was a lot of energy clearing in each of us at the time. And there was only, like, out of 50 people, there was only like 2 or 3 guys at this particular last thing that was happening. And I'd put my hand up and volunteered to be part of it. And so there was 5 of us involved and the other 45 watching. And at the end, we had to explain our experiences. And I'm sort of in there. And during it, I had this incredible pressure on my chest. And I was feeling aggravated. And the person that we were trying to help, I just wanted to say, effing hurry up and just get on with this, because this is nearly crushing my chest in. Like, this is the physical feeling I've got from all this. So at the end, I sort of politely said that. I said, in all honesty, I wanted to swear. And one of the women sort of looked at me and she goes, well, why didn't you? And I'm like, because I'm in a room of women and I didn't feel, again, I didn't want to, they don't know me that well. I don't want to scare anyone. Like we just sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
feel like I couldn't be as expressive. Like, some of the women were being expressive in their way of what, they was going
Right.
on for them. And I'm like, that's weird. I'm not doing that stuff, you know. But I just wanted to swear and say, stop mucking around and hurry up and clear this out, because I'm
Yeah.
struggling to handle it right now.
Ah,
But I held it in because
I can
I've
feel
said,
it from your description.
yeah, I didn't want to scare
Ooh.
people. And but this woman who, and it wasn't the facilitator, but it was someone who was quite experienced at it from what I'd gathered. She just sort of gave me permission. Well, let it out,
Yeah.
mate. Like, do what you want to do. But it was a big room of people. There was some other very new people like me as well, and I probably would have scared them. So yeah, it was
Oh, totally. I mean, I curse like a sailor. You've heard my podcast. I drop F bombs,
yeah,
and I think they're quite expressive and useful. So,
yeah,
I think all words in the language should be at our access for the appropriate
yeah.
uses. Um, but I think this does bring up another aspect of the masculine feminine. I think that sometimes we think of sanctity or sacred spaces as being passive. They are quiet. Holy and quiet are practically synonymous, aren't
Mm,
they? And so when we create these gatherings, I feel like there is an undercurrent of an underlying assumption that there is something sacred about this space that we're all holding for each other. And you say sacred, and my human belief systems adopt quiet, passive listening, right? There are times for that, but there are also times for cursing and fire and punching and all the other aspects of the human pantheon of emotion. They are all sacred, according to the chorus. And honestly, I think sometimes our sacred spaces need a dose of the masculine, quite frankly. And so I can understand why men find it difficult to identify with or even desire being in these places when there are natural aspects of them that will need to be inhibited for them to fit into the passive aspects of the sacred space, as opposed to bringing the masculine, fiery, whatever word we want to use, aspects of the masculine to that sacred space.
mm, yeah. And I was just remembering too, a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed a psychologist from California, and he was sharing he'd just moved, like he's probably in his early 20s. He'd moved from Minnesota or somewhere to California, and he was having some issues, and he didn't know why, but he turned up at this men's weekend. This is in the 80s in California in the mountains somewhere, and there was a teepee and all sorts of stuff, full hippie sort of thing. And he said they were going around doing something, and he said he just started uncontrollably crying, and he didn't know why, but it felt good. Da, da, da. And he goes, all these men who he didn't know one of them. This all came over to him, physically picked him up and started carrying him around. I said, how did that feel? He goes, unbelievably good. Like he said, it was just like, a bunch of women don't do that. They would go over and just hug the other lady
Hug
that they
you.
didn't know, like, oh, it's all right,
Right.
honey, and pat her hair, stroke her hair. He said, no, this guy's just physically picked me up. Yeah! And they're holding him up above him, and they're carrying him around and cheering him, and yeah. And he said it was just able to release it more. And he goes, ever since that moment, it was just that emotional release. And he goes, I felt so accepted, and that just leads into another thing that I shared in the men's group last week, something from the chorus. I said, for years, I've believed that love was the answer to just about everything. But I always was like, what the fuck is love, really? That's what I said to the guys. I said, look, I get it, but I love my wife and I understand that. And if we physically come together, I understand that. But what is like this love for humanity, like da 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 da? And then I said, finally, I've been listening to this super cool podcast lately, and a one-word answer came through: acceptance. And I said, it's just lightened up my world. And finally, and then one of the guys, he'd shared something pretty full on, and I said, your wife accepted you, and because she accepted what you were experiencing, what you said, she was showing her love for you. And it was just, all the guys are going like, yeah, like, and I mean, they seem to be getting it, but for me, it just dropped in. I was like, now I finally understand. And I said to them, it'll change. My perception of what love means will evolve and change through the years. But on this day, right now, in time that doesn't exist, right now, acceptance makes so much sense to me. Just accepting who we are, accepting other people, accepting that I don't want to get out of bed and go to work, accepting that it's rainy and the roads are flooded, accepting that it's the middle of summer here and it's stinking hot. We've had a couple of days last week that are about 100 degrees with 95% humidity and we're dying. Just accept that it's awesome that we're here experiencing it, and just accept things. And because love to me is just as like this la-di-da little word
Right.
that's like a feminine
Relatively
word too.
passive can be,
Yeah,
right? Really. It's like,
yeah.
how do you grab that with your hands and like do something? It's like it's not enough to sink your teeth into sometimes
Mm,
as a concept, which I can understand for especially for a masculine nature. What do you do with that? For
mm.
an aspect that needs to be dynamic and moving and engaging, right? This is something else I'll say too is, all those years that I was sick, I used to get kind of frustrated with the course because I like action and I like doing things and trying things out and jumping out of my comfort zone. I couldn't do any of that while I was sick. And they said, rest, deep rest comes before the adventure. And they meant this aspect of allowance, right? Can sometimes feel like I'm not doing a whole lot. Cause like even in our examples there, well, I'm accepting that that's not happening today, or I'm accepting it's a rainy day and I can't maybe go do my workout the way I thought I would, or, okay. So sometimes in the early stages, it feels like allowance or acceptance is like just roll over and take it. Feel right, not always. Sometimes it's like I feel peaceful, but peaceful needle can sometimes dip over into, but it's just like doing nothing. Feels like I'm doing nothing, right? Okay, it's a phase is what I will say, and you pass through it. and you see sort of new beliefs. You become conscious of new things that you were resisting, that you were feeling. Okay. So you're feeling the things, you're feeling the things. And to an active five senses body, it may feel like you're doing nothing, but energetically, you are actually integrating a whole bunch of stuff, integrating a whole bunch of stuff by allowing it to be, allowing it to be, allowing it to be. And that comes out in the five senses. There is a next phase where then you are able to express that now expanded allowance into your life. So you will move through situations faster. You will come up with different ideas. You will recognize the signposts of synchronicity more often. There is a direct relationship between what we allow to be true of ourselves and then what we allow ourselves to receive from the universe. So this is what I'll say then to add to that for the male audience or the masculine audience out there is I think as a society, right now we are going through this phase of and allowing ourselves to feel things, which sometimes can feel like we are sitting on the sidelines. All this stuff is happening. I see other people changing their lives. Why am I on the sidelines? Why haven't I done this yet or changed this yet? Right? It's that phase of you're recognizing it and you're just recognizing it. You aren't yet acting. I think our society is doing this. I think this is the phase that we're at. We're realizing all these things that we feel. We're seeing under the covers of a lot of the ways this all functioned. There will be a next phase where I think a lot of this becomes a lot more dynamic, a lot more active. And love, this force of allowance that we're dabbling into now, becomes an active force. And this is something that I wouldn't even know entirely how to explain because it's such a new experience for us. But what does dynamic, radical acceptance or allowance look like in motion? And I think this is part of, I hope, maybe, that the divine masculine is waking up to. There is a force, I think, in the masculine part of our society that has not been tapped into because so much of it has been thwarted, because so much of it has been numbed out and not felt. And just like the example you gave where he cried and then the men picked him up, right? And then, there's this active embrace of what it was. I feel like that's coming. And I don't know what that looks like, but I feel like it's really important. And so, for whatever that's worth, for a guy out there who's like, I don't know, this feeling emotion stuff, it's not the end of the road. That's not where it ends. You're not just going to sit around and like feel emotions and do nothing for the rest of your days, right? It's the first step of coming into contact with your own ability to perceive energy. And it's the start of your power. The next step is where you begin to express that in this world. And all of us are waiting to see what you do with that.
Mm. And if they're going to be angry, as I said earlier, probably only going to last 90 seconds. After that, they
Right.
can, we can handle most things for 90 seconds
Yeah.
and go through
Yes.
it. And some tears may well up. Some
Yeah.
sadness may join in that anger as it goes through, but yeah, it's almost like a gateway, a portal, like that. The feel like having the guts to feel the emotion can take you into another realm.
I
That's
love that.
it's no different. It's not like, like some crazy movie. It's just like now, like, because it lifts like some of that.
Yeah.
It's like an invisible force on you that gets lifted off, and you're like, I feel lighter, I feel easier. It that that thing's still there, but it's not bothering me. Like it's,
Yeah.
yeah,
And you
yeah.
almost have a greater freedom of movement and
Mm,
choice, right? Because of that lightness.
mm,
And so that movement and freedom of choice will translate into lifestyles, livelihoods, the future of our planet, etc. It will become something in a broader, easier movement. There'll be more dynamic action as a result, I think, of all of this tuning in and being able to feel it.
yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. All right, I've got one last question for you. If your microphone was connected to all 8 billion people on the planet right now, and you knew they wouldn't judge, blame, or shame you for anything you said, what would you say to them? And then possibly, what would the chorus say to them?
Wow, that's a big question.
It's huge.
Oh, it's the same thing I feel every day. I think they're incredible. And I think that's the same thing the chorus would say too. So maybe we are on the same wavelength, but not a doubt in my mind. Not a doubt in my mind. And I see it. I see it. I see wars, upheaval, issues, challenges, families struggling. I see it. But I never have a doubt that we chose this and we're coming through it, and that there's something incredible about humanity. And there always will be. And that I'm glad to be here among all of us. And I really do think that it is incredible right now, no matter what happens next, no matter what we prove to the universe, no matter how big of a party there is at the end of this. I think they're all incredible right now.
And I was suspicious that that's roughly what the answer would be. Yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay, all your contact details will be in the show notes, or are in there as the people listening now. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to cover? We left anything out? It's vital.
No, and this was great, Doug. Thank you so much. And I've enjoyed listening to your podcast too. And I'm very glad to have been invited to be part of this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. Like when you responded and said, "Yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to be on your show," I was like a little bit dumbfounded. I was a bit like, "Holy shit, wow, like this is going to be amazing." Like, just it was just like, wow, how did she agree to that? Because like I say, I have a lot of fears, but I also have a lot of courage. So I do invite a lot of people onto the show, and a lot of don't get back to me. And but you did. And like out of all the people I've asked, you're right up the top there with like really exciting me with that you would grace me with your presence. And I've absolutely enjoyed it. So thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your very valuable time that I've taken a lot of, and I've absolutely enjoyed it. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Well, we're at the end of another thought-provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever-reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition. It will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.